He stayed in Las Vegas for 7 days and never attended the event, so that worked out well for him. And then he went straight into rehab, so that was great. You run into everything in this business. Leadership is a fascinating thing, And it takes our best efforts, our very best efforts, to become leaders worthy of the name. It's funny when you're growing up, and I expect a lot of you are like I was. You know, you heard Bill Mitchell say a few minutes ago, don't take shortcuts. I think when you're a kid, that's all you look for. And I'd be in school, and I'd always trying to find the easiest way to get something done. I have no idea how much I would have abused the internet had it been available to me back then. I don't know if I'd ever written any paper. And it's interesting, and there were a number of things I wasn't very good at in school, but probably I was worse than anything else in my math classes. I never enjoyed math. I understand its importance in the world. We live in Silicon Valley. There's so many smart people there, that have logarithms for thoughts. And they're brilliant people. And they can barely eat on their own, but they're brilliant. And I'm around that. But, I remember being in an algebra class and coming up to my teacher and going, why do I have to learn this? Why do I have to take this class? He says, it's important for you to become well-rounded. I said, says who, right? And exactly what is well-rounded? But I survived my algebra class, and I found out I had to take one more math class, and that was a geometry class, which ended up being my least favorite class of all time. Everybody's got a class they didn't like. Yours might have been a language class, it might have been a science class, it might have been a history class. For me, it was a geometry class. And I remember coming in the first day to my geometry class, and I sat over by the wall, and I sat behind this big guy. He ended up turning around, and we talked a little bit. And when you're that age, I was 15 years old. When you're that age, you're sensitive to age differences, right? And he seemed older to me, and his name was Gene. I said, Gene, how old are you? He said, I'm 18, I'm a senior. I said, that's a sophomore geometry class. He said, yeah, I know, I flunked it twice. This is my third chance. If I don't pass it now, I don't get to graduate. And I liked him immediately. I related to him. I understood the way he was approaching this class, right? But the very first day, I found out something I didn't like about the teacher. He got up, and he went to the board, and he picked up a piece of chalk, back in those days, and he turned to the class, and he looked around, and he picked somebody. He said, and the person came up and stood beside him, he handed him the chalk, he said, every day, I'm gonna have somebody do there's a theorem. Do anybody remember this from geometry? There's a theorem, and then there's a proof. See, the problem with that for me was, I didn't care if it was provable. I didn't care about the theorem, and I sure as heck didn't care about whether it could be proved or not. Who cares? Do you know how much I use geometry now? The only thing I use from geometry is this. The shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. That's it. That's the whole thing. 2 semesters, agony, to get that. 1 sentence, right? Brutal, unreasonable, unfair, like a lot of things in life. So Hanson, that's the teacher's name, and I'm not calling him Mr. Hanson because I didn't like him. Hanson stood up there with that chalk, and he picked that guy, and that guy, and Hanson had already written a theorem up there. He says, I want you to try and prove this. So the guy wrote it out, and he got it. One of those guys, right? I had a bunch of guys in that class. There was a guy in that class screwing up the curve that got a perfect score on the math section of the SAT that year. A perfect score. Do you not appreciate what I just said? That son of a gun had a perfect score in the math section of that national test. Nobody gets a personal score. I think there were 2 in the United States that year. And one of those suckers was in my geometry class. Screwing up the grades. I mean, he had glasses that thick. And red hair that stood straight up. And he was a really nice guy. But he's a pain in the rear because he understood everything. And I was at the other end of the spectrum. So I was constantly pissed off because of watching that. Anyway, okay, I'm done with that. I'm getting pissed off right now. So there's a point to this, so stay with me. So I watch Hanson do that. Again, you don't see it now, but I'm an introvert. It is my nature. When I get back to the room, I stop talking. And I read. That's who I am. Really. I had to learn to do this. And it wasn't easy. Thank you, man. So, back to it. Don't let me get distracted. I can be easily distracted.